Welcome, everyone, to the last session, the last Montessori Europe webinar, in which we will look at community. When we worked on Montessori Everywhere, we felt that community was really central to the triad of the child, the environment, and the adult. And it gives us the opportunity to reflect on our role again, and also on how to enable the child to truly become the agent of change we are looking for. I now hand over to Andy. Would you please like to set the scene for tonight?
Absolutely. How beautiful to see all of you again. It's been quite a journey having these four, this set of four discussion series, and it's been a real honor to be with you. And it's given me a lot to think about what I'm thinking about community. I've been thinking a lot over the last couple of weeks about community for many reasons. And the first question that we're asking people to reflect on, which was the first question that we posed to our panelists, is what does community mean to you? And every time I ask myself that question, I have a different answer. I grew up thinking that community was something very formal, because I think because of the way that my family related to communities that we were a part of. Because I grew up in a school where my mother was one of the teachers, because our religious community was very structured. And so I think I grew up with this idea that community has to be very formal. And what I'm finding as I get older is that that's not at all the case. I am now seeing myself as a member of many communities in very informal ways, communities that form and reform. And I think Montessori Everywhere was actually like the epitome of that, because it came together out of, Simone had this idea and she went to her friends and she said, hey, I think I want to do this thing. And from there, it self-organized into a global event. And I think that to me right now is the epitome of community, in that sense of creation. The other piece that has hit me really hard recently is the community is also about where we belong and where we grow. And our community here in Canada, the Montessori community in Canada, suffered a great loss last week. Carla Escobedo, who was a very active member of the formal Montessori communities in Canada, and also a member of my friend community and of my Mexican immigrant Montessori community, passed away last week. And so I've been, and there is Blanca, who, hola Blanca. Carla was Blanca's school partner, and the community that set me off in Montessori, the Caban community. Carla and Blanca have shown me so much about what it means to create community for the children, for the adults, and how you can't really create a community for the children if you don't first create a community for the adults. And so experiencing the loss of Carla as I'm thinking about community has been very impactful on me. And I wanted to honor her and her memory by speaking about her in that way today. So that's community for me. That's what I think of when I think of community right now. And as I said, every time I ask myself the question, it changes. So the second part of that question was, how does that understanding of community guide you in creating guidelines in collaboration with your students? Well, I don't have students right now. When I did have students, my community guidelines were always co-created, even with the 3 to 6 year olds. There was no community guideline that did not happen in consultation. Um, the only guidelines that I set were respect. We respect ourselves, we respect our environment, we respect each other, and that's it. And everything else that came out of that came from them. It emerged from them, from their relationships with the environment, with each other, with their own empowerment of being able to speak for themselves and to advocate for their own needs. And and it came about either in small groups or it came about in big groups, and it was all about facilitation on my end. So that's what creating community collaboratively means to me. And I think it's the same in adult communities. I think when we're dealing with adult communities, we're also, and I was actually really pleased to hear both Roland and Wendelin talk about the ways in which you are building community. Wendelin, you talked about building memberships, and that is creating community. It's about finding what passions we share and what we can do with them. And Roland, you talked about building community through sport. And that is such a non-traditional way of thinking about community, but sports community is so important. It is a way of coming together. It is a way of creating cohesion through shared effort. And so I think that is beautiful. And I think we have all of these examples in this room today of people who have been creating communities for many, many years. And I think we all have a lot to learn from each other on that. So I won't go any further on that, and I will move right into this really big question, right? Dr. Montessori taught us that there is no adult who was not made by the child we once were. And once again, I'm finding this convergence because at Integrating Montessori this month, we're talking about identity formation. And this is, this is the basis of it. We were all created by the children we were. And I talked about my childhood last time and about the adults who shaped my childhood. So I'm not going to get a lot into that, but I do want to say that it's not just the adults, it is the structures within which those adults work too, right? So there are so many different things in this world that impact who we become. I've been revisiting Urie Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory of development, and just remembering the importance of what he called the mesosystem, which is the way in which your different microsystems interact with each other. And I know I'm using jargon here, so I'm going to bring it back. The microsystems are the direct interactions that we have as children with people or with systems. So they are the things with which the children interact directly. It is the child's relationship with a parent or a caregiver or a guardian. It is the child's relationship with a sibling. It is a child's personal relationship with a teacher. And the mesosystem, those connecting threads, are the ways in which my relationship with my mother impacted my relationship with my teachers in the sense of my own actions. So not in the sense that my mother was friends with my teachers and therefore that obviously impacted my world, but the way in which I related to my mother impacted the way I related to my teachers. And the way that I interacted with my sister impacted the way I related to my friends. All of these things are so entangled. And I'm using the word entangled very purposely here because it's not just about interdependencies. Yes, they are obviously interdependencies in that they depend on each other, but they are entangled in the sense that even when there is no dependence, they still affect each other. So I've been very conscious lately of the way that all of these things come together to create individuals who then create communities, and the way that communities then come back and create individuals. And it's very cyclical. And it's actually very fractal, more so than cyclical. Um, One of the readings that we're doing in Integrating Montessori this month is Education and Peace, chapter 14, the education of the individual. And it is so fascinating to come back to this after so many years. And this is a piece that, having talked to a lot of people, is not usually a part of training, because we're so busy looking at the absorbent mind, the secret of childhood, from childhood to adolescence, all the core pieces that we have to know in order to get started. But this is where we go further. This is where we start to see Dr. Montessori's thoughts on socialization. And it's very different from her other writing, because this is all about the way that individual freedom leads to community, leads to healthy society. And I think it's really important to understand what she means by individual freedom, because we have such a different interpretation of that word today. In 2020, when we are all about, in most Western societies, we are all about the individual and individual freedoms as adults. And when there are so many people who feel so entitled to what they consider to be their rights. And what Dr. Montessori is really talking about when she's talking about freedom is the freedom to act on our inner healthy drives. She's talking about the process of normalization. She's not talking about, I have the right to say anything at any point that I want to say. She's talking about the freedom to develop my will so that I can understand when it is right for me to speak. And that is how we build a healthy society. So we can't look at any one piece individually and separately. We have a tendency to want to compartmentalize individuals, society, socializing agents, schools, but they all work together. There is no separation. We form ourselves as we form our communities, and our communities form us as they form themselves and as they form every other member of community. And so we do end up with this kind of fractal series of relationships where everything is affected by everything else. And I know that's not a very clear way of saying it, but that is what it comes down to. I had a quote that I wanted to pull out from here, but I can't find it right now. So I'm going to go back to one of the things I said in my blog post, which is really the crux of this for me. And I had a very hard time saying it in plain language, so I just went for the Montessori jargon. And what I said is that the goal of Montessori education is peace through justice. And that's not something I'm making up. This is something that Dr. Montessori herself said. And we often forget the second part of that. We often think that Montessori education is peace education. And we often forget that peace has to come through justice. And that Dr. Montessori said that over and over and over in many, many ways. So what does that mean exactly? And this is where, again, all of these things that are coming together for me in my personal life, again, this is me, the individual within my various communities, and how it's all affecting the way that I am seeing this concept right now. So how does this actually happen? It is through our ability as adults to prepare those vitally responsive environments, to prepare ourselves as part of that environment to be vitally responsive, and to ensure that those vitally responsive environments and adults are actually responding in ways that support the processes of normalization and valorization. If any of you have any issue with any of these words or want clarity on them, please do put it in the chat, because I don't want to spend a lot of time defining them if I don't need to, but I'm very happy to do so if needed. So if you don't understand normalization, valorization, or vital responsiveness, please do drop it in the chat so that I can take a step back. So in terms of what that means for us, it's understanding that social cohesion, which is another piece that Dr. Montessori talks about, which we often forget. Social cohesion is this coming together of normalized and valorized individuals in the creation of that vital environment, which is in a way separate from the prepared adult because it is their creation. And that's where the vital responsiveness comes back in again, is our understanding of when that is happening, of seeing when that is happening and being able to step away when our guidance to that is no longer needed. So when I was talking earlier about how I would create community guidelines collaboratively with the children, there was that real balance of knowing like, okay, these children are not yet normalized enough to be able to create a guideline around wrestling in the classroom right now in this moment. So as the vitally responsive adult, I need to step in and help them see that we need some form of consensus on, is wrestling really appropriate in the classroom? And to facilitate that discussion. And in doing so, to actually help them engage with that process of normalization, of helping them understand what is within them that is driving this need to wrestle. And how can we meet that need otherwise within the classroom? And so it is a co-empowering and co-creative process in which I am facilitating the normalization process so that the children can then be better at creating those guidelines without me. And then it's also knowing when to step back. So following on that example, one of my most incredible learning moments in the 3 to 6 environment was when the children were wrestling outside and they were having, some of them were starting to get hurt. And so they were not happy that they were getting hurt, and yet they still wanted to play. And all I needed to do at that point was to sit down with this small group of children and go, what can we do about this? And they were at the point in their process that they were able to speak to each other about, this need to play and this need to stay safe and how to balance it. And they're the ones who came up with these ideas of like, tell me when I'm starting to hurt you and I'll stop. Or let's make sure that you want to play before we start. And that was just so powerful for me because I did not really deeply understand until that moment that 5 and 6-year-olds are capable of coming up with these tremendously powerful ideas around consent on their own. And I felt in that moment that if I had been the one to say those things, I just don't know that they would have taken it so seriously. I don't know that they would have responded in the same way as they did when they came up with it together. And they got where I wanted them to be, but they didn't know that, right? And so it was an empowering thing for them. So valorization, yes, valorization is a concept in the use of in Montessori adolescent environments. And valorization is a two-pronged concept. It comes from very purposely from both root words, valor as in value and valor as in bravery. And the idea is that the adolescent, being a nascent social being going through a social rebirth, if the adolescent has already been through the normalization process enough that they can act on their own will, then they can start to go through the valorization process. And the valorization process is all about understanding that they are a valued member of their community because they can contribute to their community by doing brave things. So that's where the valor and valor both come into play. It's about understanding that when we are brave within our communities, we become valued member of our communities. And it's about the bravery to embrace other people, as well as for the adolescent especially, a lot of physical work, right? So valorization is actually very physical work, and it's very purposeful work, and it's very social work, and it's often very emotional work as well. So valorization is like normalization, but in a social context. It's in a social context, and it's all about finding our place within the community. And that's where we come back to that tension that's always present in every human being of, I am an individual and I want to belong. And this is the tension that, we talk about a lot in systems theories, is about the individual and the system. And there's always that tension. The child wants to be free. The child also needs to be a part of the community. And that's the process of normalization, right? Is the process of the child understanding that my freedoms are dependent on the freedoms of everybody else in this space. And my will, the development of my will, is about me knowing when to stop and when to act. And it's about balancing my personal drives and my desires and my happiness with the impact those have on the people and the things around me. And so we take that process of normalization, of balancing these two things, into valorization, where it becomes bigger. And it becomes about valuing myself as a human being. And it becomes about understanding my value to the community. And it all becomes conscious at that point. And so adolescent communities are really all about making that process conscious so that adolescents can learn how that works, right? And they can start to see, ask those big questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Why is this community doing this? Why am I having this impact when my intent is over here? I want to be good, but I'm having this impact that's really negative. So what? And starting to really navigate those internal and external processes. That's what valorization is really about. And that's why valorization is such a crucial concept when we're looking at how we get from, that Nido or that Casa community to a new human who can create an entirely new society. It's through these processes that can happen. So it's not about the peace rose. I don't know how big the peace rose is in Europe, but it's huge here in North America. And it's not about the peace table. It's actually about the relationships and the caringness and the responsiveness within our environment. And that is how I see the relationship between peace education and justice. And that was the last question that we had posed, is what do you see as being the relationship between the two? And that's what I see, is that we can't have peace if we haven't gone through these intense processes, which are intense for us as adults, I should say, but they're not really for the children, not if we do things right. But as adults, if we don't go through these intense processes of understanding that tension that we all hold between me and all of my communities, And my communities also include the social structures, governmental policies, political systems, economic systems, all of these things that we have created as individuals within communities. And once we start to see that tension, then we can actually start to see where those structures and those systems do not allow for equal access. And that's where we can start to see, okay, well, where is my sphere of impact? Where can I actually make an impact? And then we can go and we can make the changes that we need to make in order to have the actual impact that we want to have. And that is how we create healthier, more just, more peaceful spaces and communities. It is now time for your breakouts. And I think Gwendolyn has probably already been busy putting people in their groups. So you're going to go off into your breakout rooms. You will have your facilitators as usual, who will guide you through the 3 questions. When you come back from your breakout rooms, we're going to ask you to think about what you've learned from the community panel, from everything I just said, from your conversations. And we want you to think about and share with us one thing that you want to learn more about. And we're doing this very intentionally. So when you come back from the breakout sessions, we're going to ask you to share in the chat one thing that you want to learn more about, while Barbara leads the facilitators through their reporting process. And then I will close you out with some final thoughts.
Thank you so much, Andy, for this quite challenging introduction. There is much to think about in terms of our own roles and the communities with which we interact, and what we can do with from the very youngest children through the co-creation of things with them towards the valorization of the adolescent. It also reminded me that we are looking not at the materials, so not at the objects of the peace table or the peace rose, but at our reflection and our sense of self. And I wonder if perhaps Heidi would like to say a few words.
Thanks, Barbara. Okay, so in our group, we had some really interesting, lovely discussions. We were from all over the place, so it was nice to have different viewpoints, and different age groups were represented, which was also quite nice. But I'll just mention 2 things that stood out for me, because there's quite a few of us to get through. But the idea of how Montessori spoke of the little children creating social cohesion within their classrooms, and that social cohesion being their work, and we just being there to facilitate that and preparing an environment, really was an interesting word to pick up that one of the participants brought in. It just highlights once again that this is the child's work, and that we really are just the facilitators, and standing on the outside with that appropriate responsiveness. And the second thing was that, or going perhaps more to the adolescent, was that looking at the communities that adolescents are finding themselves in, and a lot of those communities being virtual communities, has created in some instances disconnect between the adolescents themselves, and the importance of those adolescents being in strong communities where they have a voice that is listened to and heard and understood makes so much difference to the way that they view the world and the value that they think they can bring to the world, going forward. So I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. Hannah, would you like to share?
Sure. It's almost impossible to summarize such a beautiful conversation. I really enjoyed creating community with my group. We talked a little bit about community and what it means, and that idea of community is a place that you can be who you want to be. We talked about community being fluid, how it changes and evolves, and how children go from a class, the microcosm of a class, to the school, to the larger society, and how their contribution evolves there. We talked a little bit about how it was to grow up. We had a lovely example from Blanca about making tortillas with her grandmother, and how her grandfather would always eat the square, not round tortillas that she made, and how that beautiful demonstration of love was passed on. I was really touched by that idea of grace and courtesy, that respect for life, no judgment, and there's no such thing as making mistakes. We're all one. That idea of peace cannot exist without justice. We talked a lot about how Montessori is a microcosm for beautiful environments and lovely interactions, but how we hope that they will carry it on to the future. We talked about how Montessori is still young, it's still in its adolescence, some even said toddler stage. And so we need to continue to let it grow and evolve to really make an impact and a change within the wider community. Thank you to all my group.
Brilliant. Thank you so very much, Hannah. Bev, I see you on my screen. Would you like to share?
I am here. Thank you. We got very stuck on community, but actually we let the conversation go because it came discussions of working in previous war-torn countries and how important the community was in terms of the families, the children. We know how to work with the children. We know how to keep them safe and to work with them on a daily basis, but it was the support for the parents that really came through our conversation, which kind of readily kind of flowed into our own experiences and how that impacted. But what was really strong is this: we need to communicate with the parents. We need to offer them opportunities to come to us, to share with us, to understand what we're doing, and to something came out with you know, what their own children were experiencing, brought out emotions of their own childhood. So dealing with parents in terms of their own childhood and education experiences. So it was very much focused on the community and more specifically in terms of the parents and carers. So beautiful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Suzanne.
Yes, yeah, we also got quite, I don't want to say stuck because it was a beautiful discussion, but we spoke a lot about community as well, just on the development of community. And it was quite interesting. We had quite a discussion around attachment and, you know, how we support ourselves and the understanding that we wear different hats all the time, whether you're a parent or the teacher or, you know, the creator of the classroom. And that the children themselves come into the environment with different hats of being a child or being a sibling or something else. And that for a lot of the time, we're actually learning to balance detachment and attachment, because you're detaching from your family group and attaching to your school group, and how the environments actually allow the children to develop that social cohesion by learning to trust each other and learning to trust themselves. And sometimes that in the preschool even, or in the nursery as you call it, that even just working with the materials might allow the children to start making connections with each other, because somebody might know how to work with something that the other child doesn't know, and they have the opportunity to share that. And then really just coming to that sort of conclusion that communities really are just overlapping circles, and it's this continuous process that goes on to, you know, to give opportunities for many different mirrors and many different windows of learning about the society that we're in and the one that we wish to create. So it was lovely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Christian?
Yeah, it's hard to summarize, so I decided to record, and in the next 20 minutes you will listen to the recording. Is this okay for you? No, I try my best to summarize. So we had an intensive discussions with a small, very small group, but very interesting people in the group. And we were focusing on normalization and the problems we had with the word normalization and the things what was in. So discussing the community approach and the normalization thing was like with normalization, we have a difficulty that there is a norm behind that. So we are in the position of judging to put the right and the wrong things into that. So we used much of the time we had to just discuss this back and forth. But luckily then Biana stepped in and said this is all too theoretically for her. We need to be more practical. And it was very good. She described from a completely different environment situations from special needs children from very poor environments with no money, no electricity, and yeah, everything no. And when they return to their families, they are so happy and so lucky because there is love and a feeling of being welcome and appreciated. And all the values we put into this are not so much important. I think this was quite important. And then we had other examples how community could be used in a school in a very practical way, that the community is invited into the school. Because every one of us, the students, the teachers, we come from a community, they come from different communities, and to bring that different communities into schools is really a good thing to work on. Yeah, of course, from the normalizations, we came to ideology and all this stuff. I think the conclusion is that, yeah, the community around us and to reflect about the community around us brings the things we can use for our education.
Thank you so much. And Wendy?
We had a lovely, lovely session. We could have gone on for hours. But I think the general feeling was that community, we start with the child and then the parents, the grandparents, the teachers, the village, and it just grows from very small to much bigger community. And there were lovely examples of how the children worked with the local community, planted trees, bulbs, one from Italy where they worked in the woodlands and they were doing recycling with the members of the community. And there were so many things we covered, but the relationships between us and teachers, us as teachers, was really important. And we really need to have that chance to be a community. And somebody said the greatest thing was the group we were with tonight, the whole group we're here, we are a community and we can learn so much from each other. And we as teachers need that opportunity sometime just to be like we have tonight and to be able to bounce ideas. It was interesting how people reflected on their own parentage maybe. One member was brought up by a grandparent and we had some interesting comments with that. I think whoever we're brought up by definitely gives us an influence and that goes through us. I know it did for me. I think also we talked about what is right and what is wrong. And Lucy has children from 2. And it's not always the language, but actually the child puts the hand up, a 2-year-old, if they don't like what's happening. And so you're giving them at that age empowerment. And somebody else was saying morality was really important. And the role of the adult, it's so important for the children to have a role model. And us as role models, we have to think of our spiritual training. And I think that is important. We have to listen to ourselves, we have to listen to the child and the other adults. I'm not sure I've really done my group great credit, but I can assure you we had a very good session. So thank you, my group.
Thank you very much. Many of these ideas were shared within our group. Our group felt very strongly that as Montessorians, we are held together by principles, but we are very diverse in our approaches, and that's what creates the richness of our experience. We have also felt that knowing ourselves is a very important aspect of us being effective teachers. And we had two very powerful images created by the conversation. One of them was that image of the interlapping circles. For me, it immediately became the primary colors overlapping with creating the secondary colors, and immediately having a whole color box 3 came to my mind. So there was a very powerful image linked to the Montessori materials, but also Claudia talked about the dance of the Montessori teachers, which I really, really loved. This idea that we have to be very light on our feet in order to be really able to facilitate, and we need to be beautiful in our movements to inspire the children. So those were the images from our conversations. I wonder if we have given Andy enough time to bring us to conclusion, but I see there is a young person participating in our session, Vanina's son or daughter, a young person. Would you like to share something with us, or you are smiling so happily on the screen? I wondered if you wanted to say something.
Would you like to say something?
Hello!
Hello!
How old are you?
I'm 6 years old.
We didn't quite hear. Never mind.
Do you want to say something to everyone?
Hello! And have a nice evening.
It's lovely to have you with us, and I hope you have enjoyed listening to the grown-ups. Andy, where are you? Are you with us? Oh, there you are, in the bottom of my screen.
I know the pictures keep shifting around. So have you left me enough time to close, Barbara? I don't know. I don't think there is enough time to wrap up this discussion, to be honest with you. There is.
I don't really think we need to wrap up. We just need to, again, set more thinking in motion. That's, we don't want to finish those conversations.
No, absolutely we don't. So actually that brings me to exactly what I wanted to say about the question that we posed for your reflection. That was a very intentional question. The question was, what do you most want to learn more about? Because the learning doesn't stop. So this series is coming to a close, but I really hope that you're going to latch onto something and take your learning deeper into that. What I want to reflect on, based on what I heard in so many of your discussions and in what has been brought back to the group, is that it's really important to understand that we do not have just one identity. None of us are a single static identity. Everything that we've been talking about, and a lot of you talked about what I call image makers, right? The people in our childhood who made an impact on us. A lot of you talked about your image makers. What I didn't hear a lot of talk about were the broader structures that have an impact on us. I heard a little bit of talking about the school, but and a little bit talking about, you know, specific conflicts, war, but I did not hear a lot of, this is how growing up in a democratic system has shaped my thinking, or in a socialist system has shaped my system. So these are things that, we tend to see as being neutral, but they're not. They're not neutral. They shape the way that we look at the world. And the further they are from our direct interaction with them, the less we actually think about them. Before I studied Montessori, I studied communication. I am obsessed with the ways in which we create meaning, and the way that messaging impacts the way we create meaning, and the way that we interpret messaging, and how we change the meaning of messages. So this is my way of telling you that this is why I see things the way I see them. This is why I see all of these interconnections, and this is why I see all of these influences, because I am obsessed with them. And so I studied them very deeply. And so I see them more clearly. And this is where I am coming from. So understanding where you are coming from can give you clarity about why you see the way things that you see them. So if we don't have one single identity, and if our identities are constantly emerging, what does that mean for our communities? It means that a great many communities are oppressive, because they don't allow us to change. They don't allow us to emerge in our wholeness, because they may accept only a part of us. And that's where we come back to this whole idea of peace education and social justice education, is how do we ensure that the communities that we are building are welcoming of emerging identities, of shifting identities, of entireties of human beings, of everything that we bring with us as humans. And one of the things that I heard is that we have to make our communities safe. There are levels to safety. When we think about safety, we often think about the physical safety of our spaces. But what we're talking about when we're talking about safe communities is a sense of felt safety, right? That tension that I was talking about before between the individual and that wanting to belong. We all want to belong. We want to be accepted in our wholeness. And that sense of felt safety happens when we feel that. Felt safety is when we feel that we can be our full self. And that is very, very rare. And it is so precious. It is so precious. So that comes back to, how do we create communities where there is a sense of felt safety? And that brings us back to the structures that we create with our communities, and to who we are as adults, because as so many of you noted, we are in process of healing whatever traumas we experienced as children. We are in process of relearning what it means to be an educator, what it means to be a human being, especially if we're engaged with the spiritual preparation of the adult. And so when we are healing ourselves, and when we are, I think it was Luca who said, when we are being that model of the peaceful, whole human being, then we can start to create structures within which there can be a sense of felt safety. And a lot of you in the chat are talking about how this right here is a beautiful example of a created learning community. And I absolutely agree with you. So when you look at how this came about and the structures which allowed us to create a sense of community here, it started with, what I said at the beginning about the way that Montessori everywhere emerged. And then it followed up with Wendelin, who has this incredible sense of wanting to create membership. And with Barbara, who is so passionate about including and pushing and wanting to learn. And then they invited me along, and they came up with this concept of, let's set the tone, then let's have dialogue. And then let's conclude with further thought. And when you think about that process of setting the tone and then making a space for all of your voices, that's where the community came about. So how do we learn from that? And how do we learn from what made this accessible to you? What made it not accessible to other people? What was it about the way in which this worked that created that sense of felt safety that allowed you to be so incredibly vulnerable in your breakout rooms? Because I've been there and I know how vulnerable these spaces have been, how brave they have been. So take that with you and think about, what was it about this experience that allowed you to be your emergent self, to be open to the learning, to the listening, and the loving. And the word potential came up, and that is such a Montessori word, isn't it? The potential to educate the human potential. That's what we're doing here. So I'm going to close off your final thought, this quote from Education and Peace, The Education of the Individual, chapter 14, page 102, for those of you who like page numbers. Only the child, we find ourselves lost at this point in a maze of contradictions. And we do, don't we? Like individual, community, belonging, safety, exclusion, accessibility. It is a maze and it is full of contradictions. Only the light child can light our path through it. The child is our only guide to what education should be. Only he can help us understand the complications of social life and man's unconscious aspiration to be free in order that he may bring about a better social order. Man seeks freedom in order to build a supernatural society. He does not seek freedom in order to go his own way, but in order to live. I thank you so much for being here for these 4 sessions. I have learned so much, and I do feel like a part of a community here. So thank you.
Thank you, Andy, so much for giving us the opportunity to share in your wisdom, to share in your provocation, to give us a chance to feel strong through the intimacy of this learning community. It will never be our intention to make you feel comfortable. It is our aim to always leave you with a nagging thought in your head, and we hope that you will find the strength to share this nagging thought with your colleagues and explore it and tease out the meaning that it has for you. If you are interested in the broader sense of the political agenda of education, the Male Montessorian has shared a really, really interesting conversation about what education gives us and the responsibility we have as educators. Wendelin will very kindly put a link to it. It is something that Sid Mohandas contributes to, but it's presented in a way that is very accessible and really, really relevant to our work with the adolescents, as we make them aware that there is always a political agenda in education, and we have the opportunity to thwart it, to challenge it, and in true Montessori sense, not to always follow the line, but fight the right of the child to be the person they truly are. And so thank you for this autumn series. We will begin on our spring series on the 12th on the 2nd of February, but we will also explore the idea of sustainability, something that has been talked about in our group a little bit. And we would like to ask you to share these sessions with your colleagues and with your friends, because the more people engage from your own community, the more opportunities you will have to create that safe learning space for your colleagues, for your parents, and also for your children. I wish you very good Christmas break, lots of preparations. I know there's a hard time, a busy time ahead of most of you if you work with children. And we look forward to welcoming you back in 2021, when we hope you will have the energy and the joy to rediscover Montessori with us. Thank you very much for connecting with us.